everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to remind all of you to please press the follow button if you'd like to be notified 1 hour prior to the start of each Ohio Exopolitics. The music you hear at the beginning and end of each show is performed by your host. Our guest this evening is Stewart Swerdlow, who is well known, and I probably don't need to introduce him, but I certainly will anyway. His website is expansions.com. He has a great DVD called Blue Blood, True Blood. He spent 13 years on the Montauk Project. He's a linguist who speaks 10 languages. He is also an expert in deprogramming and determining which Illuminati programs are embedded in the mind patterns of any individual. His mission is to help others heal themselves in a positive way, thus avoiding the negativity he experienced. And I'd like to welcome Stewart back to the show. Stewart, how are you this evening?
Fine, Mark. Thank you for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you here. And I know we were talking a little bit about the weather there. I guess it's kind of cold and windy today in Michigan?
Yeah, like it is every day of the year.
And you've kind of been traveling on the road a little bit. You're speaking here and there, and you've got some engagements coming up, I think. Is that true?
Yeah, well, you know, this year, every year I say, well, I'm not going to travel so much, I'm going to take a break, but every year it gets worse and worse, and so far 2011 has been the most traveled year I've had so far. And I just got back last night, and I'm leaving again next week, and it just goes on and on till the end of the year, which isn't too far away.
Well, it's good to hear that you're popular and that your information is getting out. Are you mostly in the continental United States, or are you all over the world now?
Oh, gosh, I've been to all 7 continents, you know, every place. I just came back from Las Vegas, where I filmed a TV show with Jesse Ventura and Sean Stone. That will be on in early 2012 when the 3rd season of the conspiracy theory show begins again. So I'll post that on my website when I know the date of the airing of that show.
Fantastic. I love that show. How far down the rabbit hole did you go?
Oh, pretty far. You know, they don't mess around.
Did you shock Jesse or what?
I think I did, and certainly I shocked his son, Tyrell. But Sean seemed to be very open to all of it.
You know, I can remember listening to your Blue Blood, True Blood CD about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was shocked. I was in a daze afterward. Do you get that much from people?
Well, yes. You know, there's a whole wide range of perspectives out there. A lot of people, of course, to them it's a big shock, and they don't want to accept anything. Other people are just skeptical, and they're willing to listen and think about it. And then there are those who accept it because they know from deep within themselves that it's the truth.
Over the years, the more I've gone back to it and studied it more and more and more, it has a way of growing on you.
Well, when something is true and it strikes a resonance within you, it grows from there. And then you want to learn more and go into different aspects of the information. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Let me shift gears a bit. I heard recently that a Russian astrophysicist, and I'm probably going to not pronounce his name correctly, Boris Rodionov, that's my guess, he claims to have proof of the existence of a highly developed extraterrestrial civilization on Europa, one of the satellites of planet Jupiter, and I wondered if you had heard anything about that, Stewart.
Actually, I had heard about that back in the 70s, so that's not news to me. But what it's going on is, as I've been saying on my website for many months and a couple of years now already, is that there's the imprinting for the public in preparation for the staged alien invasion, which I feel will start in 2012 with the London Olympics or the Queen's Jubilee. But that's what's going on. They're trying to imprint the public to get them ready for the announcement of alien life forms out there.
So is there a extraterrestrial civilization on Europa, or is this part of the hoax?
Well, there have been, shall we say, alien colonies or bases on many of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn for thousands of years. So it's not a new story. It's just a question of how they are going to present it.
And I've heard you say that on the dark side of the moon, there's a crater that has a building in it that is in the shape of a swastika. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and obviously people know the Germans didn't win the war back in the 40s, but they developed amazing technology with the help of their allies in the star system of Aldebaran, and that's documented in German secret papers that were confiscated after the war. And you can read about it in books in German that are not available here in the United States. But towards the end of the war, when the Germans knew they were not going to be successful the way they had hoped, they started to build a colony on the dark side of the moon in a crater. And the main shape of this colony is in a swastika, and that was actually photographed from lunar orbiters. And even manned spacecraft when we were sending people to the moon, they saw that. And what I find even more interesting, Mark, and I can't remember the name of the movie, but apparently there's a film that's about to come out that is based on the Germans, or Fourth Reich, in the back of the moon, invading their Earth. And I saw a trailer for that a little while ago, and I cannot remember the name of the film. But here's again an imprinting to let people know in a fictionalized way what the truth is going on out there.
Well, that's interesting. I think they do seem to tell us many things in these movies, and I was kind of surprised to hear you say that you think the hoaxed alien invasion might start this next year. That's pretty soon, don't you think?
Well, actually, it was supposed to have started a while ago, but there was a lot of sabotage and changes in the agenda. You know, the Illuminati fight amongst themselves, and because of that, the agenda schedule changes and gets modified. But the precursors to the staged alien invasion have already begun with the announcements of objects in space, the 50 super Earths that they said they discovered, the fact that they think 400 million Earth-like planets exist in our galaxy. So they're letting people know, little by little, scientific information that makes people accept that there is alien life out there.
If they have this hoaxed alien invasion, do you imagine that they will use these craft that they have to attack cities and destroy buildings and kill people, and it'll be like 9/11 on a massive scale?
Well, I think 9/11 was almost like a staged trial run, if you will, to see how the population of the Earth would react to a major attack on a huge city. Now, what they will do in the staged alien invasion is actually use their Blue Beam project technology, which is from satellites, and they will project fleets of UFOs in the atmosphere. They will send laser beam weapons on the Earth under the guise of it being from these UFOs. So people will really feel and think that the Earth is being attacked when, in fact, it is all holographic images and satellite transmissions that is arranging the scenario in front of them.
Do you think, though, that they actually will kill people like they did in 9/11, though?
Yes, I do think that they will kill people. Yes, you know, they will blow up buildings. They will attack bases on the Earth. They have to make it look real, and they feel that human beings are expendable.
You know, not to switch gears entirely, but I can remember when I was about 8 years old and watching the moon landing and seeing the flag waving beneath the astronauts, and I can remember as a child thinking that something was terribly wrong, that flag shouldn't be waving. And in 1969, I think the moon landing was hoaxed, wasn't it, Stewart?
Yes, of course. There are those who will vehemently deny it. But yes, it was hoaxed, and you can see that it was staged the way the lighting is behind them. It casts shadows in a certain way, and you're correct about the flag waving, indicating that it was in some kind of a moving atmosphere. And if you speed up the movements of the astronauts, so it looks like they're slowly bobbing up and down in a weightless environment. If you speed it up a little bit, it looks like they're just walking. You know, and the film shown was slowed down, and that's why there was a very long delay from the actual viewing from the cameras to the transmission on televisions on Earth. There was a delay; it wasn't simultaneous.
I'm jumping around a little bit tonight. I have heard you say that the reptilians planned the end of the United States thousands of years ago. Can you elaborate on that, Stewart?
Well, I don't know if I actually said it like that, because the United States didn't exist thousands of years ago, but they had an agenda going back a long ways for the eventual occupation and assimilation of the Earth into the Draconian Empire. But that plan has changed because the Illuminati developed and created this hybrid society and changed to their own agenda and actually want to usurp the power of the Draco Empire for themselves and create a new empire with Earth as its headquarters. And that's why they're so adamant about changing the configuration of our solar system and the politics and finances on the Earth to support that agenda.
Do you think the Illuminati has the power to oppose these reptilian beings?
Well, they're doing that. My feeling is that they're going to make, or they want to make a kind of a deal with them so that they allow them to rule the planet for them.
And when you were at Montauk, you saw reptilians and you saw some beings from the star Sirius, correct?
Sirius A, yes.
And the beings from Sirius A, I think you said they were very tall, very thin, with very large blue eyes, and they were very, very intelligent?
Yes, and in my book, Blue Blood, True Blood, there is a drawing of being from Sirius A for those who are interested in seeing that. They have very fine features, large elongated heads, and very fine bones, long, slender fingers and hands, arms. You know, they look very slight, but they are very powerful.
The ancient Egyptians worshipped them as gods, didn't they?
Yes, the ancient Egyptian culture actually was a blend of the Atlantean culture from the refugees from Atlantis, as well as the influence of the beings from Sirius A, who then decided to change the Egyptian civilization and point it in a different direction. And, you know, that's why the Sphinx, the paws of the Sphinx point towards the morning star, Sirius A. As it rises in the morning, the Sphinx is pointed to it, and that is a message of where that civilization originated.
Do you think these beings from Sirius A are still working behind the scenes with our governments?
Yes, and I will venture to say that the main government with whom they're working is the Israeli government, and as well as the U.S. to some degree, but mostly now it's the Israeli government, which is why the Israelis have been so brazen with everything, because they know they cannot lose.
Why are the Israelis working with the Syrians?
Well, the Israelis, or the Hebrew people, have heavy Syrian genetics, and that is why they were kept separate from the Egyptians and taken out of Egypt. They were kind of a hybrid group from within Egypt that was then given its own place to develop.
So the ancient Israelites, they bred with the Syrians?
No, the Syrians created them out of the ancient Sumerian and Egyptian genetics mixed with the Syrian genetics.
Wow, this does get complicated, because I think I've heard you say the reptilians crossed the human reptilian DNA to create the civilization in Sumer, correct?
That's correct.
And then the Syrians came later and mixed their own genetics in that pie?
Yes, after Sumer was changed, when the reptilians resurfaced from underneath the earth, there was a kind of free-for-all going on at that time for quite a bit of a number of centuries and millennia, when many different groups then came to mix their own genetics in and create different, what we now have as ethnic or nationalistic groups. That's why there's so many different nations. That's why there's so many different cultures, because even though they all sprang from one fountain, if you will, they've been tampered with by different hands and different mixes that have added their own DNA and changed things. And so we have different strains, different groups that now exist on the earth.
So what interested the Syrians in Earth? Why do you think they decided to come here in the first place?
The Syrians come from a planet which is no longer very viable. They do live underneath their planet, but it is an ice and snow world. Nothing can really grow. It's the result of a war eons ago. But the Syrians also have a very high form of technology, which is unrivaled anywhere that I know of. And so they're very pragmatic. They like to trade and sell their technology to others. They have no loyalty, so to speak, to any one side or another, very much like the U.S. does on this planet. And so they go around and they trade and they get their roots and their resources and materials, whatever they need, and they also control everything because they have the best technology. They never give out the highest amount of technology. They keep that for themselves.
I remembered you talking about another group at Montauk, another extraterrestrial group that interacted with the Greek civilization, I think you said.
Yeah, Antarians.
Yeah, and you said you didn't like them at all. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, that group was very aggressive, warlike. It was a very male-dominated society where females were for breeding purposes only, or for actually, slavery and servitude. And the men, the males were the ones in charge, and they even had relationships with each other. And so they had no loyalties, they had no families, they were very unemotional, except I guess I could say that the emotional range they had was anger, aggression, jealousy, things like this. So they were very tough to deal with.
Do you know anything about their world, where they came from?
Well, going back in time, all humanity originated in the Lyrian star system. So they were just one of the colonies of the refugees in the Antarian star system that developed this culture over many eons of time.
Do you remember where they were from most recently?
Well, the Antarians are from that star system, and before that they were Lyrian.
I see. Oh, that's also interesting. Let's switch gears a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about Emmanuel tonight. And the man we know as Jesus was actually named Emmanuel. At what point did the name change start? And in other words, at some point in the historic writings, the authors started to refer to him as Christ rather than Emmanuel. Can you tell us about that, Stewart?
Well, Christo, is a Greek term that means the anointed one. And the same like in the Egyptian word Meshach, which is, or where the Hebrews came Moshiach and then became Messiah. It's all related, these terms. And so the name Jesus, people go back and they look and they say, oh, there was Yeshua. Well, Yeshua is not even an ancient Hebrew name. That's a modern invention. There was Yehoshua or Yahshua, but there was no Yeshua. And so the name Jesus came after the Council of Nicaea, which I think was in 330 AD. That's when they rewrote the Bible and changed everything from what it had been originally in order to suit the new Holy Roman Empire. But the original name was Emmanuel, and he, I should say, was also a genetic creation, which is described in the Talmud of Emmanuel, which was discovered in Jerusalem in the early 1960s, and then sent to Switzerland for translation, and part of it was also sent to the refugee camps in Lebanon for safekeeping. But a lot of the information, unfortunately, was destroyed. But Emmanuel was a genetic creation. That's why the Church refers to the Immaculate Conception. It was not that it was Immaculate Conception, but then implanted in the womb, and that's why they called it that.
Does the Vatican know all about this?
Oh, the Vatican knows a lot, and that's why they control all the ancient volumes. They either destroy them or they keep them in the vaults underneath the Vatican that nobody can ever see. But unfortunately for them, the Templars, or who became the Templars, discovered documents in the Solomon's stables in Jerusalem that revealed all of this information, and that's why the Church allowed the Templars to do what they did, because the Templars blackmailed the Pope. And, of course, that worked until 1307, I believe, when the Pope said, okay, now the Templars have to be arrested or killed, and that's the end of them.
Do you think the accounts of the miracles and such, are they true, or do you think that they were added later?
The miracles performed by Emmanuel.
Right.
Well, it's a mixed bag there, because a lot of the miracles that were written about were added or embellished centuries later, and some of them were the result of technology that was used at the time that looked miraculous to the people. And still other things that were done were the result of Emmanuel using his energies, like what I call hyperspace energies, to manipulate matter. So it's a mixed bag of what happened there. Some was made up, some was technical, and some was from his own hand.
Very interesting. The Billy Meyer contact notes talk about the Talmud of Emmanuel.
Yes, it's because the Palestinian professor that discovered them sent those documents to Switzerland, and Billy Meyer got his hand.
Very interesting. Very interesting. We're seeing now in many parts of the world, I think the Illuminati are actually consolidating their power, and it looks like they're trying to eliminate all of their enemies. And it seems like, well, let's just stop there for a second, because a lot of people are of the opinion that, the New World Order is kind of falling apart, but if you look at it from one perspective, it kind of looks like they're taking over. What's your thought on that?
Well, I don't think it's falling apart. I think it's reorganizing. Mm-hmm. I think that they're afraid of what's going on in the Kuiper Belt, and so they're speeding up their plans. They need to consolidate here on this planet so that there's no opposition to their agenda whatsoever, so that when and if the Kuiper Belt beings do make a move on this planet, they will have a solid base of operations with everyone behind them, so to speak, in order to confront it.
Can you tell us more about this whole Kuiper Belt thing? You're really big on that. Do you have a connection on the inside that's feeding you really good information, or what?
I'm laughing because, really nobody knows what the heck is going on in the Kuiper Belt. It's like complete silence. They're very, very secretive, but they do make themselves known. The vehicles that have been seen coming out of the sun in recent year or so, these massive ships, are heading right for the Kuiper Belt. They're amassing a huge fleet there. A few years ago, the NASA would release information to CNN and BBC and Fox about these objects that were sighted almost on a daily basis, these huge objects, and then they realized, people started to get suspicious, like, what's going on? What are these things that are appearing? So then to cover that up, they said, well, it's always been there. In fact, Pluto is a Kuiper Belt object. It's not even a planet. And then they said, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a planetoid. And and now who knows what it is? We don't even know how they've classified Pluto anymore. I don't think they know. After their cover story kind of went in different directions, but they have admitted, and recently as a few months ago, that the Pioneer spacecraft, for example, was stuck in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter because of some strange force emanating from the Kuiper Belt. And then they said this energy was actually bombarding the Earth. And they made several references to the Kuiper Belt. They said there's a huge object there hurling meteors and comets at the Earth. And so, little by little, they start revealing information. Of course, they don't tell you the whole story, but they do tell you that something's going on.
It's interesting you were talking about giant ships coming out of the sun, and I had a guest on. He has a book. It's entitled The Human Quantum Leap. And to make a long story short, he had a friend that was a Marine who supposedly was guarding an ET anthropologist that was here. And what made me think about that is he says that one of the things that he learned was that the stars and the planets, they sit in something called gravity wells, these spinning gravity wells that all intersect in what he calls first-dimensional space. And he says these ETs use these gravity wells to jump across the galaxy. And I wondered if you had heard anything about that.
Well, I maybe have different terminology than that. Every point in time and space has a unique set of coordinates or vibrational rate. And if you tune in or you match your vehicle with the same vibrational rate as the place you want to go, so that there's a match of the frequency rates between the ship and the target, there's an instant transmission, there's an instant connection, because that vibration cannot exist in two places at once. So the vehicle goes instantly to that place. And that's how time travel and deep space travel is accomplished in a matter of moments.
And our secret government has known this probably for many years, correct?
Decades and decades.
Well, I want to say hello to everyone in the chat room. I know we've got some folks in. I want to say hello to After Dark Radio, Kathy's Distant Echoes, Charn Parker, Critterford, Dale Ray 19, Denichi, DG2, Eve 1 Hart, Gerber Daisy TM. I think we've got, oh boy, I'm going to guess a couple dozen or more anonymous guests in Infinity Pathway, Eileen, John May Lives, Judith E.B., Midnight Spirit Wolf, Moonchild, Fante, RD47, Revel and Will, Spin Dave Tagar. Thank you, everybody. I always enjoy when people come to the show. Stewart, you usually take a break about now, but I think I'm going to push on if you're doing okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, I have my astronaut diaper on, so I don't have to use the restroom or anything.
Okay. If you need to take a break, let me know. Ed Dames recently said on Coast to Coast that he thinks we might have martial law in the country in the next 2 years. Do you think that's a possibility?
I've heard that for 30 years.
So you're not too worried about that?
No.
Okay.
So we already have martial law, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. It seems like we're getting that way. Another thing I've heard you talk about is that the elimination of native people all over the earth is going on because they have a greater connection to the God mind. And I wondered if you could tell us about what that is all about.
Well, most of the native peoples in the world, whether it's Native Americans or Aborigines, Africans, what have you, those who live close to the earth, close to nature, who are not mind controlled and programmed, and know how nature operates and can communicate with a larger percentage of their brain and DNA, these people are considered a hazard or a threat because they have the capacity then to teach others to do the same. And if they did, then the mind control and programming would be undermined, and people would be, freer. So, of course, they are attempting to eliminate the genetics of those people, or at least to blend them in with other genetics so they can dilute the original genetics, and in that way reduce their power and effect to help others.
There's something very healthy, I think, about being close to nature and living close to nature. And one of the things I've been trying to do is, grow my own food, and I try to get the most fuel economy of a car that I could possibly get, because I think if we're not dependent, if we're independent of the Illuminati, that's probably the best thing we could do. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's it's a very good idea to understand nature, because in so doing we understand ourselves and who and what we really are. And then we learn that nature is actually a reflection of the mind pattern of the group mind or the species that lives on the planet. So in effect, all the animals and plants that we have in front of us are projected out from the human mind pattern and species mind pattern onto the planet to sustain us. So yes, it's a very good idea to work with animals, work with plants, understand weather and that kind of a thing. But then we also need to understand the artificial manipulation of that nature that is changing it in many ways. And unfortunately, almost on a daily basis now, I see these changes, these anomalies in the behavior of animals and plants all over the world that shows that it's not the way it used to be. And then I get concerned that will it ever go back to the way it's supposed to be?
You mentioned that somehow our mind pattern is related to what we see in nature. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's I use that analogy. I'm sure many of the listeners have heard this 1,000 times, but the mind pattern is like film, the brain is the projector, and physical reality is the screen. So what we perceive in front of us, the movie in which we participate, is being projected out from our own mind patterns by our own thought bands, both as an individual and as a species. So everything that we see and experience around us is part of that projection from within. So if you don't like the movie that's playing around you, you've got to change the film, and that's the way you think.
Stewart, do you think that the beauty of our Earth is then somehow related to something in the collective mind of humanity?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a very good statement that you made there, because the beauty that does still remain on the earth is a proof of the beauty within humanity that still exists and cannot be taken away. And so we need to look at that and say, okay, I look at this beautiful mountain, this beautiful ocean, this wonderful flower. That's coming from within my mind. I am projecting that out so I can perceive it. And if we look within, we'll find a way to fix everything that is external as well.
Yeah, that's a very hopeful, then. That means if there's a true link there, then the humanity has great potential then.
Oh, humanity does have amazing potential, and as I always state, humans only use 10% or less of their brain capacity, and they only use 3% of their DNA capacity. So how much more could we be if we opened up even a part of that?
Boy, that's fascinating there. Let me switch gears a little bit. I've heard you talk about our Bible, and you say that our Bible contains coded messages.
Yes.
So did the authors of our Bible put those coded messages in there subconsciously, or was the Bible not written by who we think it was written?
Well, if you look at how you could take the first 5 books of Moses, which is the Old Testament, and they put that into a computer without spaces between the words in the original Hebrew language, and then you find these what they call skip sequence codes that lead to information that couldn't possibly be known by the ancients who wrote this down on paper. So absolutely, to me, that's proof that this came from a higher intelligence that knew about all the possibilities, about every single being on this planet. It's quite amazing. You could put anybody's name in the Bible code computer program, and you will get information about that person, no matter who you put in there. Or you could put any event or any time sequence, and all the pertinent information related to that will be revealed if you know how to look at the codes around it. So the Bible code has a lot of potential futures. It's nothing that's cast in stone, because a lot of the predictions that were made in the Bible code books never came true because they were only possibilities, and it was dependent upon which path humanity chose to follow.
So do you think the God mind influenced what's in our Bible?
Oh, God mind is in everything. So yes, it has to be so.
Well, that's...
Now, let me qualify that. The stories and the what you see in the Bible on the surface, that is just what I call the cover material. You have to look at the coding underneath to get the real information.
Well, we'll get back to that. I've heard you say that the Illuminati often give this 3-finger salute, which is symbolic of this 3-horned god or this lower astral entity, and that the Bush and the Windsor families give this salute, and that they actually worship this 3-horned reptilian god. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's also called the Devil's Salute, and it's not only the Bush family and the Windsors. I have seen, well-known singers, actors, politicians, all kinds of people in the limelight giving that signal, and that's a clue. They're not giving the signal to the audience. They're giving it to their controllers, to their handlers, to know that, yeah, I'm performing my function and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. That's the message. And so, yes, they do worship the 3-horned god, which is from the lower astral, and there's all kinds of gods that they worship and have sexual magic ritual to invoke them and use them in physical sense with the vessels that they use. So it's and programming and mind control is part of that, because in that way the civilization does not change. It doesn't deviate from what the agenda is.
So when the Bushes or the Windsors or some pop star gives this 3-finger salute, do they know what they're doing? Are they consciously aware of this 3-horned reptilian god?
I think most of them are. I think the ones that are at that superstar level or high political power level could not possibly have gotten there unless they were playing the game and knew what the game was.
You know, I've heard you talk just a little bit about mind control, and I know a lot of our stars are mind controlled. And I saw this interview with Britney Spears, and it was really sad because the interviewer was asking her about her breakup with her boyfriend, and then Britney just she just started babbling. It's just like she completely lost touch with reality. Can you tell us a little bit about the mind control that's used on our stars today on TV?
Well, it's used on everybody globally, and it's so that they say and do the right words and actions so that they can trigger the population or the audience in the proper manner to perform a function, to think a certain way, whatever they need them for to do in that moment. And then we've also seen recently the announcers, television hosts and hostesses that suddenly start speaking in gibberish, and they can't control what they're saying. Yeah, and you know that, and that is a form of the mind control, and they're being tested so that if someone does start to say something that they shouldn't, that their brain can be scrambled so they become unintelligible. And then, of course, they say, well, the person had a migraine, or they might have had a slight stroke, but they're perfectly fine now, and they'll be back at work. Well, that's because it was a microwave pulse that did that to them. It happened to many people in the last few months, recently. So when you see a series of such events, one after the other, you know that there is some kind of test going on, some kind of function that's being performed purposely, and you can't blame it on migraines. I used to get migraines. That never happened to me.
So when people like Britney Spears or Anna Nicole Smith, they kind of have these breakdowns, are we seeing evidence of how they were mind-controlled and kind of abused by the elite?
Yes, and you know, depending on their structure, there's something we call programming overload, where there's so much programming put in, and it's all being triggered or activated too much at once, that it overloads the brain, and the person cannot function. And then they go into these collapses, and you get someone like Amy Winehouse that just passes away, or Michael Jackson takes an overdose and kills himself. You know, all these kind of things that happen to the stars, and then there's a cover story that goes along with it. So yeah, sometimes they get overloaded, and then they break down, and then they become a liability, and then they are eliminated.
So are these stars programmed as children?
Oh yeah, sometimes they're programmed in utero.
Wow. So the people that make it big generally were placed there by the Illuminati?
You don't get to a high position of global prominence unless you're part of that game.
Oh, this stuff is scary sometimes.
Well, you know, okay, you can look at it like that, but it's nothing new. It's been going on for centuries. It's just now more open, more available information that people have about it, so they know what's going on. But it's been around for a long time.
I wanted to switch gears again, and I had a few questions that are more about you personally. And one of the things that I've heard is that your mother didn't even have a birth canal, so it was impossible for her to have gotten pregnant by normal means. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. When she went into labor with me, she was taken to a hospital that was not even opened yet. It was under construction. There was no heat in the building. And they happened to be doctors and nurses in there to examine her, and they said that she had no birth canal, and it was physically impossible for me to be born. But not only that, it was physically impossible for me to have been conceived. And just so it may happen at the moment, there was a doctor traveling from Texas who was there, and he was a specialist in this, even though no one ever heard of it before. And he performed surgery on my mother while she was in labor to create a birth canal so that I could be born. But, of course, it was kind of a makeshift thing, and they had to literally reach in with forceps because they said I was hooked onto her pelvic bone and pull me out. And I was, she said when I came out, I was completely black and blue. She didn't think I was going to make it.
Wow. And you even have some physical differences from most human beings, right?
Yes, I do. I suppose you're going to ask me what they are.
Well, we don't have to if you don't want to talk about it. That's all right.
Well, I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Okay. We can change the subject, no problem.
Well, I don't mind. I have extra vertebrae in my neck. The way my pelvic bone and lower spinal column come together is completely unusual. There's another bone mass that shouldn't be there. I was told not long ago that the lower part of my spine is actually open and just covered by skin, and that would have been spina bifida at the time, but it was covered with the skin when I was born, so they didn't realize it at that moment. I also have a different number of teeth in my mouth than other people, and my cranial capacity is larger than most human skulls. And that's just a little bit of what I am.
Wow, that's interesting. I have heard that a different number of teeth can sometimes indicate off-world genetics, and I know we all have off-world genetics, but I've heard that most mammals here on the Earth have like 32 teeth or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting. Very. Do you think?
I don't have 32.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I wanted to switch gears again a little bit, and I know you've talked about the Fourth Reich in Antarctica, and can you tell us about that?
Well, back in 1938, the Third Reich decided that they were going to build what they called a paradise for the Führer in Neuschwabenland, which is in Antarctica, in an area now which is controlled by Norway. And they built this underground area from 1938 to 1944. And at the end of 1944, they had huge caravans of trains coming from all over Europe to Bremerhaven or Hamburg area, where these people were loaded onto boats and submarines, all blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan types. It didn't matter if they were German, they were Poles, Ukrainian, from all over as long as they had the genetics. And they were sent to this paradise underneath Antarctica. The place was built with material from Argentina and from Brazil, Chile, South Africa. All the southern continents contributed to the material that was used. And at the end of the war, that's where Hitler and Eva Braun and their contingents were headed when they left Berlin. And they flew to Peenemünde Island, and then they took submarines and ships and left for first Argentina and then Antarctica. But Hitler and Eva Braun were removed in Buenos Aires and stayed there, and the rest of the crew went on to Antarctica. And in South America, what is unknown to most people is that since the 1920s, the Germans had established bases in Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, Argentina, Chile, in the jungles, in the deserts, under the mountains. They had all these underground and even above-ground bases that they developed even during the war. So it was quite a network that they had.
Is do the Nazis have this tremendous underground paradise down in Antarctica still to this day?
Yes, and in fact, if you try to do Google Earth in that spot, it's blacked out.
Wow, that's interesting. And we actually tried to attack this base in '46, and it didn't work out too well, right?
Right. The British, Canadian, and American Air Force and Navy sent a whole bunch of ships and planes down there in 1946 for a war effort, even though the war was over. And they were there about 8-9 months, and then they returned, and there were casualties of, I think, about 50 or 55 casualties. And they had come up against vehicles that they could not, win against. These real craft that the Germans had that defied gravity, that had weapons that they had never seen before. And so they returned to the base. And last year I was in Antarctica, and I went to several other military bases of Ukraine, Britain, Argentina, etc., and there were plaques on the base that said that the base was built to monitor the enemy. So I thought, who are the enemies? Like the penguin terrorists, perhaps? Or, the SEALs, are they the enemy? Why are these military bases, what's the enemy that they're monitoring? But if you know the real story, you can understand.
Very interesting. I'm going to try to take this call, Stewart. I got a kind of a weird Skype hookup here, so I'm not so sure how this is all going to work.
Okay.
But let me try to bring this person on. 310, do you have a question for Stewart?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, this is Denichi from After Dark Radio with Anthea. Hey, Stewart.
Hey, Denichi. Stewart, can you hear that at all?
Vaguely.
Okay. I'll repeat the question. Go ahead, Denichi.
Okay. I have a question for Stewart. I wanted to ask him, in his opinion, does he still maintain some of the abilities he had utilized when he was at Montauk?
Do you still have some of your abilities that you had at Montauk, Stewart?
Oh, yes. So that's how I do my work when I do readings for people and do reports, etc. I'm able to see the energy fields, the organs, the DNA, read the mind patterns, see simultaneous existences. Yeah, that's I've taken that ability and used it for what I consider to be a more positive purpose.
My next question, Mark, if you can ask him, does Stewart know, or is he aware of that somehow a very interesting group in the Navy picked up some of the training aspects that Stewart went through and provided it to special groups within the Navy regarding paranormal combat, if you will?
Stewart, are you aware that our Navy may have learned some of the same skills or techniques that you learned in Montauk, and they use it in some kind of paranormal kind of combat scenario?
Oh, not just the Navy, but all the military branches use paranormal warfare, if you will, and the governments of many countries of psychic warriors to attack their rivals and enemies. So yeah, that's standard procedure. Did you have another question? Go ahead, Denise.
Well, I wanted to say, well, then, based on his answer to my question, I wanted to say thank you. It actually served me well, also. So, yeah, thank you, Stewart. If the Navy they learned something, they definitely taught some of us in that group, and some of us are still alive today by just using that training. Remote viewing on the other aspects too, especially for the medics with disability. We could see a patient just the way you described it. We can identify the problems and correctly identify them. So, yeah, it does definitely work.
All right, Denichi. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it, man.
No problem. See ya.
Bye-bye. Well, Stewart, we're down to about 4 minutes. I want to let everyone know that you're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We're talking with Stewart Swerdlow. His website is expansions.com. He's got tons of material there. I've listened many times to the Blue Blood, True Blood DVD. Stewart, is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with about, what you have available now, or your radio show, or where you'll be speaking next, anything like that?
Yes, thank you, Mark. This coming Sunday, October 30th, will be the inauguration of my new radio show called Infinite Realities on wolfspiritradio.com. On my website, there will be a link that you can listen in at between 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Next week, we'll be going on our Atlantis cruise from Miami, going to Dominican Republic, Antigua, Tortola, Barbados, St. Martin, St. Kitts, and a couple of other places. And we're going to scan Atlantis and get information that has not been seen before. And then in December, I will be in South Africa and Namibia and Dubai for those who want to see me in those locations. And then in January 2012, I will have my mini OMG training session, which is an 8-day-long session. You can look up the details of that. I will train you to do what I do. You'll become like mini-me out there. So, read the site, expansions.com. We have a free newsletter. We have forums. We have comments, Q&A, everything that you would need, information for yourself, your loved ones, and for your planet. So please tune in to us, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Well, Stewart, thanks so much for coming on the show. You have a good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure.
Good night.
Good night.